This is Soul Hackers 2. This is, of course, a spin-off, a side series of the main Shin Megami Tensei sort of meta-series, kind of like how Final Fantasy has a bunch of different spin-offs and things as well. So SMT has stuff like Persona, Devil Survivor, Strange Journey, Digital Devil Saga, and all sorts of other things like that. So this is one of those games. So, as an SMT spin-off, there are certain things that people expect, and this game delivers on many of them, but not all of them. It does have some pretty serious weaknesses, but I did actually find myself enjoying it more so than not. So it is, of course, a turn-based JRPG with some social elements, and in this case, the battle system has been changed up a little bit. So the way that the SMT battle system, which is called the press turn battle system, normally works, is that it's all about exploiting enemy weaknesses to various elements and things, and every time you exploit an enemy's weakness successfully, you'll get an extra turn. So you can actually have up to like 8 turns on your side. But the enemy can also do the same thing to you, so you want to make sure to not have weaknesses to common elements that you're facing. This game uses it a little bit differently, and every side gets the same amount of turns no matter what. So you no longer get bonus turns, and you no longer get turns removed for hitting an enemy with like something they absorb or something like that. Everyone on every side gets the same number of turns. However, the way it works now is when you hit an enemy with something that they're weak to, you'll get what's called a stack, and it'll be represented by the silhouette of a demon floating around the battlefield, just kind of chilling, watching you, and it'll be the demon of the person who triggered the weakness. And at the end of everyone's turns, once all the characters have acted, if you have a stack available, something called a Sabbath will happen where your main character Ringo will summon up all of the demons whose silhouettes were floating around, and they will all attack the enemies and do one big burst of damage to every enemy at once. And the more demons on the stack that you had, the more burst damage this will do to everyone. So this means that you're still, of course, very much rewarded for exploiting weaknesses just like before, but instead of extra turns, you get a big boost of extra damage at the end. And just like how mainline SMT games and Persona games and things are balanced to hitting weaknesses as often as possible for extra actions, this game is also balanced for hitting weaknesses as much as possible for big burst damage at the end, because enemies have quite a bit of health in this game when it comes to like the elite enemies and the bosses and things, and you really can do a tremendous amount of damage if you have a large demon stack at the end of the turn, so it's very much balanced in the same way. It's just that you don't get extra turns anymore, so it's kind of the same concept, it's just used a little bit differently. There are some other changes to the battle system as well. For one, the elements have been shuffled a little bit. Now physical damage is actually split into 2 different types. There's slashing physical and gunshot physical, and dark and light elements have been joined together into a singular element called ruin. And you'll also now find that a lot of these status effect inflicting spells, like poison and things of that nature, will also do ruin damage in addition to inflicting their particular status. You also do not summon your demons for battle. Instead, you have 4 set characters that are part of the story, more like a traditional JRPG, and instead, each of them can equip a demon to their weapon, and the demon they have equipped will boost their stats in different amounts. It will also determine their resistances and weaknesses to various elements and other status effects and things, and it will determine all of the abilities they can use. So instead of actually summoning a demon in battle, except for during the Sabbath at the end of a turn, you equip them to characters, and all of the spells and skills and things that that demon had are now available for that particular character to use. This means that you're always going to be swapping out pretty frequently to make sure that you don't have weaknesses to things that are currently very common in the dungeon that you're in and stuff like that, and you also have a lot of spells and skills that are available to exploit weaknesses to the stuff that you're currently facing. So you are encouraged to swap around quite often, and the leveling system reflects this, because once you level a demon up enough to where it learns all of its skills and has nothing left to learn, it will give you a final bonus item as a gift. More on this in a second. And it will also stop leveling as fast. You'll see this little red orb symbol next to demons' names who have learned everything they can, and at that point their growth slows down a lot and you're encouraged to swap them out. Recruiting demons also works differently in this game. It's linked to something called demon scouting. Every time you enter a dungeon, you will send out all of the demons on your team to scout, and these effectively replace treasure chests and things. Instead of walking around and finding pickups and treasure chests and things, you'll find your demons just sort of chilling around, and they'll have a little symbol above their head that will tell you what will happen when you talk to them. If it's a heart, they'll heal your HP and MP. If it is a sort of group of hexagons, they'll give you an item. It could be a basic consumable, it could be something very valuable like a material for upgrading, you never know. And if it's a little demon symbol, they will give you a demon for recruiting. And normally in SMT games, there's just a talk option in battle, and you simply talk to a demon whenever you want to try and recruit it. But in this game, you can't do that. Instead, you have to roam around the dungeons and find some of your scouts around the place, some of which will have demons available, and then you can talk to them there and try and find out what they want and see if you can give it to them. Although you do have some control over what demons will appear for recruiting in this way, because the more you fight a demon in that particular dungeon, the more likely it is to appear on one of your scouts. I've noticed demons are a lot easier to recruit in this game in exchange for not being able to talk to them whenever you want. Generally, in a lot of SMT games, a demon might ask for 2 or 3 different things before they finally accept and join your team, but in this game I found they always only ask for one thing, but in exchange you have to actually find them all around in the dungeons as scouts instead of just being able to talk to them in battle, so I guess it kind of evens out. In fact, I would say that this whole game in general is quite a lot easier than any normal SMT game usually is. I would say that it's still above average for JRPG difficulty, but it's definitely well below average for SMT difficulty. It's really not that hard. I knew that it was easier when the first couple of bosses didn't bend me over a barrel instantly like they usually do. They were actually pretty easy. And I think the reason this game is overall a bit easier than your usual SMT game is probably twofold. One is because of the whole press turn changes, the fact that enemies can't get multiple turns and things for exploiting your weaknesses, so you're not as punished for having weaknesses like you usually are. But also, I think it's because your party has a lot of health. You have a lot more health in this game a lot earlier than you usually do in a lot of other SMT games. Oftentimes, your party's health gauges are in like the very low triple digits for quite a while, but in this game it's very easy to have like 500 plus HP for everyone by level 20 or 22-ish in that sort of range, which is definitely sooner than usual, so you have more of a kind of buffer for enemy damage in this game, which I think is another factor that contributes to it being a little bit easier than these games usually tend to be. There are, of course, the social elements to talk about, and you do go around various points in town. You have a sort of town map that you can travel along various different bits between. They're usually small zones with various shops and things, and you can, of course, buy all sorts of things as well as interact with your party members for various effects. And this is partially because there's actually a system where you can grow closer to your party members, and each party member actually has a sort of personal dungeon that you can go into. And you have a soul level, which represents your sort of bond with each person. Each one has their own soul level separate from the others, and the higher the soul level gets, the more of their personal dungeon you can explore, the more you can learn about their past, and the more stuff for them you can unlock. And as you do this, you will unlock various permanent upgrades and things, stuff that you really do want, so it's worth going into these dungeons even though they're mostly optional. And this is why I actually find the game less grindy than an SMT game usually is, and probably another factor for why it's a bit easier than usual, because you also have these 3 internal dungeons that you can go to at any time that you want and explore them. There's basically never a need to grind for the main story dungeons, because if you're having problems in the main story dungeons, you can just go to one of these areas and advance it a little bit. You'll get some new demons, you'll get some levels, you get some equipment, and then you can go back to the story. So it doesn't really feel like, at least so far, that there's ever been a time where I needed to grind, where I was clearly like 5 or 6 levels behind and had no choice but to just grind it out, because there was always a different dungeon that I could go to since there are these 3 optional ones. There are quite a bit of other things to do, at least. There's like an accessory shop and various item shops. There's a comp upgrade shop. Comps are your weapons, and you can spend a lot of money as well as various different materials that you get from killing demons to upgrade your weapons in different ways, like just basic attack upgrades or increasing their power with certain elements and other things of that nature. You can also increase that character's aptitude with an element, which is necessary for equipping Mystiques, which are these things that demons can sometimes give you, what I was talking about once you max them out. Mystique is sort of like an accessory, and everyone has one Mystique slot to equip at first, and you can get more than that later. And Mystiques will often either reduce the cost of certain types of skills like healing or fire spells or something of that nature, or they amplify the power of those skills. And you have to have a certain aptitude in that skill type in order to equip a Mystique. So if you want to equip like a Fire Augment 3 to drastically increase the power of your fire spells, then you have to have at least like a C rank in fire. So you'll need to actually upgrade your weapon to increase your fire rank, and different characters can have different elements that they can actually unlock. So there might be some characters that are better with certain demons than others because they have a higher aptitude for certain elemental powers. There's also an item shop that you can go to that will exchange various demon materials for higher ranked consumables and things than you can normally get elsewhere. And just like in classic SMT fashion, like in the mainline games, consumables are very powerful in this game, so you do actually want them. And I find that this game seems to take a lot of its mechanical ideas from SMT 5. It has various things that are similar to it. Its various upgrade systems are kind of like the glory system from that game, and the demon fusion is also here as well, so you can of course fuse all your demons to create new demons, and there is also special fusion that you can unlock various other boss demons and things for. You mostly get these by exploring each party member's personal labyrinth, as well as completing various side quests in those dungeons. So there's another good reason to do those side dungeons, because you can get some really good demons that way. There's also quite a lot of focus on food in this game, because you can eat at your hideout at any time to restore everyone to full health and MP, and then give you some sort of buff that will last the entire next dungeon that you go into until you leave it. And these buffs can be really strong, so it's definitely worth doing. And one thing I really like about this game is there's a lot of incidental dialogue that adds a lot of background and detail to the characters. It really feels like you're a party getting to know each other, because in battle they'll talk back and forth to each other. If you're targeting an enemy's weakness or you're targeting an enemy that you don't know how it responds to a certain element, they'll actually comment on that every time you do it, and it makes it feel like they're actually communicating with each other and sort of getting to know what's happening all at once, and it makes them feel like a cohesive party, I guess, because they're constantly chattering between each other. And every single food item actually has a little custom scene where they talk about that item, that food, and if they actually like it or not. And overall, this is definitely the best part of the game's presentation. It's got a really nice UI, which is standard for SMT. They tend to have really good, very usable interfaces that are nice to use, which is important in a JRPG because you're in menus a lot, so the menus need to be good, and they are good and easy to navigate here. But it's that presentation style that you are a party of characters getting to know each other that really kind of pushes it above for me, because the chatter and all the little talkative bits that help you to actually get to know these characters in small ways is actually a really nice touch. It even happens during boss fights. Sometimes the bosses and the characters will even talk to each other or about each other while you're deciding what to do. Sometimes one of your characters who's at really low health will actually ask for help, and if a character heals them, they'll actually talk back and forth about it and respond to each other and stuff like that. There's just a lot of little details in how the dialogue works in this game. The voice acting is great. Honestly, it's a pretty interesting story, in my opinion, when SMT stories tend to be real weird, and this is no exception, but it is interesting at least. And the character dialogue is just probably the high point for me. It's really good dialogue, and it feels very natural, which is the important part, because these are characters that don't really know each other, but are getting to know each other while working together, so it actually feels like your party is sort of a unit that is working together rather than just a bunch of silent protagonists. You know what I mean? It's nice. I really like that presentation. However, I did mention earlier that there were some negative aspects to this game as well, and the absolute biggest one of those has got to be the dungeon design. So this is a big deal because SMT games are known for their creative, really out there dungeons that are a joy to explore because they're like a visual feast. This game does not have any of those, unfortunately. The dungeons are very basic in design and really not interesting at all to look at. All of the characters' personal dungeons, all floors of them, look exactly the same. They're just a boring blue void with a bunch of platforms that you walk around on. They're extremely samey and boring. Honestly, the dungeon design in this game reminds me of the PS2 .hack games, and that's not a good thing. And the actual main story dungeon design are just corridors. Basically, they're just long corridors attached to rooms. It's just lines and squares and lines and squares. And sometimes these dungeons are so massive and made of corridors that the minimap actually takes up like half the screen real estate to display itself, because it's just this big sprawl of corridors, and it's just really uninteresting to explore these dungeons. They even use the same visual themes multiple times in a row. For instance, there's a part where you go to 2 different subway dungeons, and they're both very, very long, and they both look exactly the same, and they're just corridors and small rooms attached to more corridors. So this is easily the lowest point of the game for me, because it's just such a boring design. The dungeons are not interesting to go through. The combat is fun, and the story is fun, and the characters are fun, but the dungeons, they're just not well designed at all, and they are a complete slog. Oftentimes they are way too long for how simplistic and corridor heavy they are, and they are often filled with dead ends that are at the end of a long series of corridors and rooms that you could never have had any idea that you weren't necessarily supposed to go that way, and you have to backtrack through the whole thing again, and it's just a slog, unfortunately. I really do enjoy this game from a gameplay standpoint, and its story and characters have kept me playing, and the really fun combat and the demon fusion and stuff like that. That's enough as an SMT fan to keep me playing, but my goodness, the dungeon design is not good. And the other big weakness of the game would be the music, and this is another thing that SMT is often known for having very good music, but in this case, I don't think the music is bad per se. There's just not very much of it, so it gets very repetitive very quickly, and because of how long and boring the dungeons are, you hear the same dungeon music for a very long time, so it makes the music seem worse than it probably actually is. The boss music is really good. I actually really like the boss themes, and some of the action themes during big story bits are really nice, but the rest of the sort of incidental and standard music that you're going to be hearing most of the time is just very kind of uninspired and boring, just like the dungeon design. So overall, I think this is a really solid JRPG with some really fun mechanics that is heavily weighed down by its very poor and repetitive dungeon design that just makes it nowhere near as interesting as it has a right to be. So this is a game that I would personally recommend if you like JRPGs, or if you've played an SMT game and you like the sort of meta universe that they've created and all these demons and things. It's fun, but I would probably get it on sale, because for full price $60, I think that's asking a little bit too much. The game is about 30 or 40 hours long, give or take, which is not too bad bad for an SMT game, but it's definitely on the shorter side of them. And although you can definitely get more than that with New Game Plus and with doing all the various side quests and things, you are of course talking about some very repetitive dungeon gameplay to do a lot of this stuff, so you might not actually want to do it for very much longer. So this is a game that I do recommend to people that enjoy JRPGs, but I recommend it on sale because it has too many negative points for me to want to recommend it at full price. Thank you guys very much for watching. I will leave you, of course, as always, a link in the description of this video to the Steam store page if you wish to take a look at the game yourself, and I'll see you guys next time.